the clip, TCB. Play the clip.
You were all very good players.
We are all very good players.
You will beat Shelbyville.
We will beat Shelbyville.
You will give
120.
percent.
That's impossible. No one can give more than 100%. By definition, that is the most anyone can give.
So fucking dumb. When we started this run-back series of A Kinda Hard, I had no idea that the all-girl fighting game went back this far. Like, as soon as people saw Chun-Li in Street Fighter 2 that far. After that, more and more women were added to fighting games until somebody eventually got the bright idea to just say fuck it. Let's make a fighting game composed entirely of estrogen-powered brawlers, and thus, the all-female fighting game subgenre was born, or we like to call it, the Fossentots. Now apparently, the early days of these kind of fighters consisted of mostly games where you defeat your opponent and your reward was seeing them naked. Something I didn't know existed and it really come across as creepy and greasy. I won't judge too hard, it was the early 90s after all, and the internet wouldn't be as prevalent until people my age started to learn about them in middle school. And that was just kids using them to play Cartoon Network Flash games or emulating Sonic and Mega Man games. Anyway, the all-girl fighters arm race continued until a company called Fill-In Cafe decided to buck the trend in making these kind of games for potential DJs and drop the pornographic angle. And it turns out once you get rid of that creepy factor of your game, lots of people won't be put off by it and be more willing to play it. It also helps that the game will become one of the most influential fighting games of its time, essentially giving birth to the entire concept of an anime fighter, whose DNA go far and wide to things like Melty Blood to the early Guilty Gears, and that was 1994's ASUKA 120, Burning Fest. The story of this series goes a bit too long for us to cover here, and I don't think we'll be able to do it justice. So for the sake of time, we highly recommend Game Babble's ASUKA 120 retrospective, the origin of anime fighters video if anything we say during this episode interests you in any way to look at it deeper. This video came in clutch for us because we were having such a hard time finding any kind of background on the series, and it puts a lot of things in perspective, especially when it comes down to the gameplay. But more on that later. Now you guys might be asking, TCB, isn't that a little bit of a cop-out? And yes it is, but trust me, this guy did his research, and we will feel bad just paraphrasing what he said and taking that well-made video and try to pass it off as us doing proper research. So yeah, it's a cop-out, and a little homework-ish, but we feel like it's fair, so check it out. The plot of the game, and I guess the whole series as a whole, centers around Rio Rand's private school for women, which throws a yearly martial arts tournament called Club Rivalry Budget Contest Mega Fight, which various clubs compete in the hopes of increasing their club's budget, the prize for winning the tournament. After several poor showings across the years, the Chemistry Club president scouts out and decides to train ASUKA in order to become this year's winner. So the game is essentially high school Mortal Kombat. But as someone who went to public school, I can't find the time to relate to these private school bitches' problems. Make a fighting game about people smoking in the stairwell in the back of the school and you needing to go that way to get to class, then maybe I'll care about your story. Let's get this BS out of the way right here and now. This game gave me the biggest case of false advertisement there has ever been in a situation like this. The splash art of the characters versus the actual playable sprites they represent are two completely different art styles. I would look at one character I had an interest in and go, yeah, she looks cool. Then pick her up, then look at the eye-catch loading screen and still think, yeah, she still looks cool. Then when the game actually starts, I'm presented with this Cyborg 009 bullshit. Great show. And I kept doing it. It's almost like my eyes never caught up with my brain. Catfishing aside, how are the actual graphics of the game? It looks okay at best, maybe even below average for 1999 standards. This game shares the same release year with some of the better looking 2D fighters for their time and ever. Martial Masters, KOF 99, Guro, Mark of the Wolves, and Street Fighter 3 Third Strike all happened. So excuse us for thinking this game doesn't exactly stick the landing in the graphics department. Maybe if they didn't spend all that time getting people all worked up about their splash art, then this probably wouldn't have been a problem. All joking aside though, that was my initial impressions with the game's graphics. The sprite work began to grow on me over our time with the game, and I ended up enjoying some of the character designs quite a bit overall. Although I still feel the game's graphics isn't impressive for the time of Burning Fest Finals release. The backgrounds you'll be punching all these mid as fuck looking gnomes to are just static background pictures of various parts of Japanese high school areas, with some of them populated with other students who don't move at all. It's not a big deal or anything, and it certainly isn't distracting, but who knows, maybe the PlayStation couldn't handle all that. What isn't mad about this game is the soundtrack. You don't have to try to convince me that 90s and anime music is an uncontrollable combo. The soundtrack wouldn't sound too far off from a 90s anime, which I guess what they were trying to go for. It's very energetic and I want to say sporty. It reminds us a lot of Super Sweep work. Super Sweep is a group known mostly for the Street Fighter EX soundtracks, and if you like that style of music, I highly recommend listening to this games. ASUKA 120 has a lot going on, and that's not just talking about the whole series. For PlayStation version Burning Fest Final, there's a couple of new additions for better or worse. And remember, this is the first game in the series, so our information may not be 100% accurate, but feel free to correct whatever we get wrong in the comments. So mechanically, ASUKA 120 Burning Fest has a little of everything in it. And as said before, you can link some of the longer runner fighting games of the anime variety to this series, and that's very cool. But also kinda challenging when trying to explain the gameplay itself. I don't know where to start, so I'll pick a random spot and we'll build from there. Wish us luck. ASUKA 120 is a neutral-based fighting game with heavy emphasis on air footsies. Those who are familiar with games like Akana Heart or Angel Eyes will be aware of that term. To assist with this, every character has access to a double or hyper jump, and unlike most fighting games when doing these two actions, you will have full control of your character, which means that you aren't set to a path while doing these, leaving players open to mixing up their approach, like double jumping and drifting out the way to force an anti-air to whiff, or course correcting a bad jump. While on the ground, characters can dash, and this can force clashing, a very important element of the game that we'll cover in a few. While dashing, hitting the attack button will cause a dashing attack. Any grounded normal can be cancelled into a dash. Combine this with the dash's ability to hop past opponent if you run into them, and there's plenty of interesting ways to open people up if they're not paying enough attention. Dash canceling in order to continue a combo is also a very effective way of racking up damage or wiggling down that pesky stun meter. Once again, we'll explain it. Pressing the C button will have characters perform a counter attack that knocks the opponent away on hit and takes 6.25% of your meter when used. They're also the only way to use normals as your guard cancel, another very important element of the game that we'll cover in a bit. We did say this game had a lot going on. Like most fighters around this time, there's some kind of super meter at play, but ASUKA's work a little different. Of course, in order to perform a super, the meter will have to reach 100, which will take you back to 0, duh. But if you're patient, and you can hold off for blowing all your meter, you can reach the 120% of ASUKA 120%. Once fully maxed out, you'll have infinite meter for a limited time. Players can also enter a state called Super Rage by hitting the talk button at 120 meter. This serves as something like a V-ism from the Street Fighter Alpha games, speeding up the character, allowing them to chain attacks more quickly for longer combos. This, from our understanding, is one of the two major additions that Burning Fest Final brings, and an addition we quite like. Shame the same can't be said for some of the other additional mechanics. Clashing is the act of two attacks colliding with their active frames at the same time. Once again, if you're aware of anime fighters, this information should not be new to you. During the clash, players can cancel to the next action of the attack priority or whatever move started the clash, cancel to movement options like dash, backdash, or hyper jump, or even cancel to throws in some cases. Dashing gives a character one clash frame, and there are also rules to follow when using dash to clash, mostly canceling to another forward dash or some type of jump. Clashing is very important to the game and expected to happen a ton during a match, so learning how to properly handle yourself during a clashing war or mind game is essential.
Another thing players need to get a grasp on is guard canceling. For the sake of simplicity, ASUKA 120's take on the mechanic is very similar to that of Sailor Moon S, in which that game gave you the ability to guard cancel anything. ASUKA, while having some limitations, give players the ability to pretty much do the same thing, with counter attacks, movement options that also include jumps, specials, and supers all being allowed. Guard canceling can also be done from the air as well, but in this case you can use normals. Now, before we get into our massive problem with Burning Fest Final, we should quickly go over the game's combo system. Although ASUKA seems to be the earliest inclusion of a Gatling system that will later be more associated with the Guilty Gear series up till Strive, and other than some slight differences, it's pretty much the same thing. Characters are allowed to juggle their opponent freely for up to 10 hits, with juggling getting progressively tougher after about 7 to 8 hits, meaning that follow-ups will need to be faster. Entering Super Rage mode during a combo will provide infinite juggle points while the timer is active, so maximizing combos to get the most out of your initial 10 juggle points and quickly entering Super Rage mode to continue juggles further seems to be the most optimal way to execute combos. The game also features things like wall and ground slams and various forms of recoveries. Now, as said before, this version of ASUKA 120 is the first time we've ever touched the series, and while we were having fun with the mechanics and the freedom the game offers, something felt off. Even with our limited knowledge of the series, damage felt too low, and after some research it turns out that all the characters' health values were doubled for this version of the game, which wouldn't be that big of a problem if they also didn't add the new secondary mechanic, the stun meter. This thing drags the game down by a considerable amount, with most, if not all matches, ending in a timeout, which isn't very satisfying at all. While getting hit, characters will take damage in both health and stun, with more damage being dealt to the stun meter before it's empty. Getting knocked into a wall or the ground without recovering will also take a chunk out of the meter as well. Once it's drained, then characters will begin to actually take damage from their health bar. Stun also regenerates super fast and players go untouched for a while, which just adds more to the dragged out nature of these matches. This didn't feel natural, and it felt as though we were playing the game well enough. Besides, one of the easiest things in fighting games should be KOing the opponent. It is the main objective after all. Confused as to why most of our matches ended in timeout by the time we managed to knock one of our stun meters down to 0, we decided to look into it a little more. And it turns out that this version of the game isn't even developed by the main developers, Feeling Cafe, with the company called Success taking the series after its bankruptcy in 1998, which would explain why this meter felt so crowbarred into the gameplay. To us, the stun meter just kind of feels like it added a whole bunch of unnecessary rules to what's ultimately supposed to be a simple, fast pick up and play game. During our research, we ran into another helpful video, which was Introverted Owl's attempt to explain how to do damage in this game, and that kind of pointed us into the right direction on how to approach it. I wouldn't say any of the info in that video is wrong, but the game is a lot different when you're actually playing against another human. The mechanics of this game lends players to be very slippery, which isn't exactly good on a timer when you also have to drain a whole nother meter in order to do any meaningful damage. The act of being stunned also puts fighters into a juggle state, so you'll have to react to that as well, and if you miss your chance to set something up to hurt, then the whole process starts over again. But who knows, this might have just been a skill issue on our part. This is our first ASUKA 120 game after all. But if you're just asking us, I think the blue meter just gets in the way of everything. It turns a fast, fun game that's supposed to boil everything down to a quick match and turns it to scrambles the game. And that's what it constantly feels like. You're constantly in a scramble situation. All this talk about an annoying blue bar that wasn't needed reminds us heavily of the changes that was made to the beast system in Bloody Roar 4, which also resulted in a game that was full of timeouts because of the added system didn't exactly mesh well with the core mechanics, among other things.
What did you do to Nagi?
I don't think I need to say this, but ASUKA 120 Burning Fest Final, even with all of its faults, is still better than Bloody Roar 4. Just need to put that out there.
Our time with ASUKA 120 Burning Fest Final leaves us feeling mixed when it's all said and done. On one hand, what the game carries over from the previous entries holds up shockingly well, and works exactly how you would expect these systems to work, especially when you consider that this game was the forerunner for a whole lot of these types of mechanics. It was interesting to be able to pinpoint where Guilty Gear got things like the Gantlet system, and how titles like Angel Eyes and Arcana Heart got their focus on aerial combat and clashing. It was also cool to learn about the many other games that would go on to inspire, and how the series technically kind of lived on through Melty Blood. But on the other hand, the newer additions to this version of the game was largely unneeded. Doubling the amount of health to extend the length of matches was a bad choice, but I don't believe it would have gotten in the way that much, ultimately due to the faster pace of the game. But what absolutely destroyed the game in our opinion was the stun meter. Having to worry about shipping down the secondary bar, while dealing little damage while chasing around a highly mobile evasive opponent, all under 99 seconds, just caused the game to feel like you just love tapping each other to the eventual timeout. I'm not saying something like this couldn't work, but in this form, it just got in the way of the overall gameplay, and it feels like it wasn't play tested or something. Unless they wanted the game to be a timeout simulator, and if so, mission accomplished. At the end of it all, I'm just glad there's a version of this game that doesn't have these annoying elements, because we really wouldn't have the strength to return to put up with the stun bar. We are grateful for deciding to do something like this for the run back though, because we would never have discovered this series otherwise. So, I guess I'll just go ahead and play some Overlimit instead. We'd like to thank PFTM Club for suggesting this game, and I hope we did a good enough job covering it. Got a game you want us to cover? Feel free to leave it in the comment section and we'll add it to the list. Or check out our channel community section to know exactly where we're opening the floor for requests. Until then, we'll see you next time on the Runback.
愛してるありのままのすべてを